And Brett too. This is like the whole thing.
Has everybody got one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm missing page 2, but page 2.
Huh?
Page 2.
What? No, I gave him one.
You give me one.
That's mine. I gave him.
That one? Yeah, that's one.
You don't have one?
Good now. I know.
Oh,
Trying to do stuff there.
here, just a minute. All right, we're gonna look at five basic approaches to Revelation. I've got a couple more sheets here. We'll probably won't get to next week. We're not gonna read since we're running late. We're not gonna read Revelation 1 this week. I think. Okay. Yeah, that thing. Thank you. Well, we've really covered a lot of material, actually. That should give you some insight to the time of John, some of the history of the Roman Empire, and how we see the persecution in the latter part of the century, and how it evolved, and then see that that the Roman Empire and the church is involved, and why the letter was written. All that will become more insightful as we begin to go through, but we'll talk about the overviews that we've already had a little bit more. But I want to look at the five basic approaches to Revelation. And these views are held by different either denominations, groups, or men in particular. And so this has come down through time, and we hear a lot about Revelation, especially in this last, I guess, probably since the late 60s when it began to kick up again. Actually, much of the millennial view began to take root in about the 17th, 18th century, but we find it very prevalent. It's kind of relaxed itself a little. You don't hear about it as much, but every time there's an earthquake or something, well, Hal Lindsey and some of those others really get it going, Matthew 24 and Revelation. But anyway, there's what is called the preterist view. And the word basically means in the past, okay? Now, keep in mind that what we're talking about is the views of the book of Revelation, okay? And so what we see in the preterist view is that the events is being fulfilled in John's own time in the first century. In other words, this was being fulfilled during the first century as John was writing, and after the first century, it doesn't mean anything, okay, as far as the preterist view is concerned. It means that many see it as being fulfilled in the first 70 years, of the first century, in other words, AD 70, what happened?
Temple was destroyed.
I'm sorry?
The temple was.
Temple was destroyed. The Jewish age came to an end. Came to an end when Christ died, but I mean, it came to an end because the temple was destroyed. And many say there's a lot of doctrines around that talk about Christ coming in AD 70 as was promised. And when he did, he took judgment upon the Jews. And then the book only has literary interest to people today. In other words, the preterists say it's already happened. It happened 2,000 years ago. So it's good to read, but it's only literature. It's only a book that you can read through and see what happened in the first century. And so there's no future prediction past the first century. And so there are those that have that view. And the problems with that is many things predicted came to pass after that time period, as we'll see as we go through Revelation. The end of the first century was really only the beginning of many of the events that were to take place and what God had promised the people. And then there's no real value for the present reader if everything happened during this time. Okay, there's nothing really to gain from the after first century readers till now. Okay. The next one is the futurist view. Really means future. It means opposite of that which we just talked about, because this view is the book of prophecy of events still to come. So as we open the pages of Revelation, and we see that it's a book of prophecy. So we'll talk about that when we look at the first chapter a little bit. But events still to come, and especially relevant for those in the last generation, which many think we are the last generation. If you listen to the prophets of today, the end times prophets, they talk about us as being in the last generation, okay? That we're in the last days. It didn't start, the church age is in the last days. It didn't start in Acts 2, but we're now into the last days, and they use Matthew 24 and stuff. Will be fulfilled in the little history of the future of Israel, which started in the 40s. When Israel got their land back and became their own government again, they say that's why we're in the last generation, we're in the last days, because Israel now, as was foretold in Revelation, Israel now has got their land back and is now the people of God, the chosen people. They still say that Israel is the chosen people. Well, the scriptures say that's not true. Not the New Testament. Children of God are not the Jews. They're the whole human race. The kingdom is universal, and so is the children of God. And that'll be fulfilled just before Christ's coming, which is the basis for the millennial doctrine, especially the pre or dispensational that we talked about on Sunday morning a year ago, whenever it was. Okay, so everybody is of the prophets are saying because of some of the signs of the times, which that isn't not new. That's been happening for 1,000 years. Before that, but for 1,000 years, they've been predicting different timetables for Christ to come. And so they're talking about Christ coming again, the rapture and that, and the last days, those kind of things that we've talked about before. And the problem is that taking figurative language as being literal, and it becomes inconsistent in what is taken literal and what is used figuratively in their doctrine. They can take some dates as or some symbols as literal, and then they'll take others as symbolic. and they'll try to mix the two. And that just can't be consistent with what is written in Revelation, okay? It's a symbolic book. And if that's true, if what is written in Revelation is to comfort the Christians of today, over 2,000 years later, then there's no benefit to who John was writing to. I mean, why? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about it to take this view and to take a millennial view when you think that the last book that God wrote to you and me, written back in this time frame to those Christians, it doesn't seem, John, I want you to write to the people and tell them what's going to happen. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because if we live another 1,000 years, we won't live, but if the earth is here another 1,000 years, we don't know if it's a day, 100 years, 1,000 years, what. But if it's 1,000 years, then they'll be saying that he wrote to those to be 3,000 years later. See, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, okay? And it doesn't give any benefit or any comfort to those in John's, because if you were in hurt, if you were being thrown the lions, or your family was being thrown the lions, or in the dungeons, or whatever it was that they were doing to you, let's say it happened today. There's no comfort for let's just say the federal government. Let's use the world thing. Let's just say that you were being persecuted by those from outside, and the federal government said, well, guess what? 2,000 years from now, America will have that taken care of. I mean, that doesn't give you any comfort. That doesn't mean anything to you. Okay? And so it's inconsistent with things written, which says it's inconsistent. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. You were just about to read Revelation 1:1 tells you that these things are soon to take place.
Yeah, that's the next thing. Yeah. Exactly. And we'll cover, when we get into Revelation 1, we'll cover some of those things that it says. So we got two views down. We got three is the idealistic view, and this is called the symbolic approach. And what this is it doesn't attempt to identify people, events, or places in the book. Okay, I skipped one, I know. I'll go back. And it's basically saying the book is non-historical in nature, because the signs and symbols that have in there simply stand for a conflict between good and evil in all ages. In other words, it was good for the first century, it was good for the second century, it was good for the third century, it was good for the fourth century, and it's still good for us today. All we have to do is look at it and read it, and it's not historical, but it tells us that there's a fight always going on between good and evil. Okay? And so it gives us some ideas about how God's working, but no specifics about any historical event or what God's going to do for what reason. And so Revelation, the problems are Revelation contains specific historical references. We'll cover some of that. And it's not just a book of covering ideas, but it's a book of actual events. Actual events. We need to remember that. Okay? The prophecy book in that it covers actual events that will take place. Okay? After the writing. We'll talk about that. Why would these be included if they have nothing to do with the point of the book? Think about that. You know. So those that have these ideas, that come up with these ideas, and we may think that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but some just don't understand, or don't want to understand, or want to pervert Scripture for their own doctrine. And then it becomes rooted in their heart and others that they teach. And we'll talk about Revelation, and it's hard to understand. About people say it's hard to understand and stuff. We'll talk about that at another time. But the historical view on the next page, number 4. Now you may see these or read these in a book that has particularly different views, called different things. The idealistic is sometimes just called a symbolic approach. It's all the same. It's all the same basic views, okay? It's also known as a continual historical or chronological view. Now, what they think is that the book, from the time of the writing of John the Isle of Patmos, all the way through, is a panoramic look, okay, of the history of the church from John's time until the end of the age. And it's chronological in its view. And so as you read through it, they say each chapter just goes in a chronological way. Okay. Well, you might want to think that, but we'll look at C and D here. Advocates try to identify various items and visions with the events of time. We kind of really have that today. Okay. Now it goes along a little bit with some of the futurist view and what we talked about, but they try to align what happens today and what's said today with events. Okay. Been popular with many Protestant groups as applying many symbols to, you know what RCC stands for? Roman Catholic Church. The Protestant groups have been hard on the Roman Catholic Church in Revelation. If you look at Revelation 13, it talks about the beast. They believe that's talking about the Catholic Church. 666, many think in this view, is the Pope. Okay. Well, they don't like it, the Roman Catholic Church. They like the preterist view, because the Roman Catholic Church wasn't there when John was. Okay. It happened after John. And so many Protestant groups use much of the starting Revelation 13 basically on much to do with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and so that's been a real problem. That's been kind of a war that's kind of going on. The Roman Catholic Church is not like that at all, and you don't see much teaching coming out of the Roman Catholic Church on Revelation. Problems often used to try to predict the end of the world. We see that all the time. It happens all the time. Okay, it's happened, like I said, for many, many years. It ignores the book, speaks of things which must soon come to pass. And it sees the book as chronological. Okay, but then as we look at the first 11 chapters, you see a fight going on and persecution going on with the church. But Revelation 12 brings forth then Christ. Not that Christ isn't shown in the other verses, but brings forth Christ. And then we see Christ and Satan in a great warfare from then on. That's why when we get to Revelation 19 and 20, how happy we are that God has been victorious, that Christ has won. Okay. And so if you take the historical view, then you get the first half of the book, even though that's not chronological, that's a repetitive history. We get to 12 and it brings up Christ. Well, that presents a problem if you understand what the book is all about and how to interpret the book. Okay. So it depicts the birth of Christ and would have a little comfort for readers of John's time. Again, like I said, it's not going to do us any good if something is written to us that's going to happen 2,000 years from now. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then there's the contextual view. The book reflects the context of its own time. Something was happening at the end of the first century. Something happened to John. We'll talk about that later. Something was happening within the church in the hearts of God's people. And they were asking questions. And one of the questions is, and I paraphrase, and this is not exactly what they were asking, but this is basically what all the comments were about, is what's in it for me? Is it human nature for us to ask, what's in it for me? Think about that. What's in it for me? And so, if you saw, and I don't say that like they didn't have a heart or anything, I'm just generalizing with what they weren't all exactly saying that, so I don't want you to get me wrong, but that's basically what's in it for me. Because what they saw is they were trying to remain faithful in the midst of a government persecution, Rome. Think about that. They were pulling them out of houses or going down the streets. They were taking their rights away. That's part of the mark of the forehead. And we'll talk about that when we get to 16. But there were problems. And then they were seeing their neighbors and their sons and their daughters and the people. Domitian loved the amphitheater and had the gladiators go. The blood, as we talked about before, blood, they just loved it. I mean, they just love the spill of blood. He had the right. You've seen the gladiators in the amphitheater, and you've seen them go like this or like this. Oh, and when they went like this, people just cheered when they booed. They wanted to see blood. Okay, and so when two gladiators got out, or however many were fighting at one time or separate times. One of them was high probability. One of them was not going to make it back. Okay. And then you had them ready for blood. So what did they do? They threw the Christians in. They said the Christians would go in, and they didn't fight the guards. They didn't call out to the officials. They got on their knees because they knew exactly what was going to happen. They said Christians would get on their knees and they'd pray, and then the emperor would let them out. I don't know how you do that. But the lions would come running out, and they wouldn't feed the lions for several days. Okay. And then they'd give them the smell of blood. And sometimes they would have blood as they were going out, they'd have some blood smell that they put on the Christians. And they'd have that smell of blood, and they'd open the gates, and they'd rush out, and they would kill. Many got killed instantly because they grabbed the necks or whatever. But some suffered quite a bit before that happened. But think about that. Think about that. And so they were beginning to say, well, what's in it for me? I mean, why? Why, God? do you not know what's going on, God? You know, I mean, sometimes in our own lives, we wonder, God, do you not know that I'm here, that I'm hurting? And so they begin to cry out to God, and God looked at their hearts. And so we see that the book reflects the context of the time, the end of the first century. Okay? So it was written to encourage the Christians who needed hope to remain faithful. If you think about that, that would be they didn't have the book like we've got. Okay? They didn't understand necessarily, even though they'd been taught some, they didn't know necessarily that God's going to be victorious or that God's not going to forget them. We know that. There's not a question in our mind. Paul and the apostles knew that. And some of the church leaders of the time. But it's hard to comprehend that in the midst of total persecution, okay, and troubled times. If you think about what was happening then, that wasn't the only thing that happened to Christians. Some were thrown in dungeons. Some were scourged continually. There's a lot of things other than thrown to the lions that was happening because in this time frame, the mission said, what? It's a crime to be a Christian. And so if you walk down the street and a military guard stopped you or a military soldier stopped you and said, Ernie, are you a Christian? I said, yeah. They had every right at that moment to take me and throw me in the dungeon, prepare me to be out in the amphitheater next time it met, or whatever. I could be beheaded. I could be burnt. Okay? It wasn't unusual to take those that were condemned to death, which a Christian was. It was a capital crime punishment of death. It wasn't anything that wasn't unusual to light on fire and put on a stick and use you as a torch for the night military and visitors to come into Rome. I mean, we're talking terrible things, okay? And so Christians were saying, what? What is it? What is it in this for me? You know, why should I remain faithful to something I'm not sure that God is even watching? And so it was written to encourage those Christians. And it was written to meet the needs of the first century church, which is basically the same as B, but it met some needs of the first century church who were trying to remain honest and truthful and faithful to God in the midst of a city that was warped. Okay? Most of those Gentile cities were warped. All right? In all kinds of ways.
Was that just in Rome, or was that, I mean, in Italy, or was that in Greece, or
Yeah, that was all over.
all?
That was all over. Yeah, we'll look at the 7 churches of Asia and talk about that a little bit, but it was all over. What happened was, as I said before, as the Romans went and took cities, then whatever that city worshipped, a lot of times it would take the Roman government and its idols and worship the Caesar or whatever, because they'd say their gods wasn't strong enough. And in other cases, there would be those that wanted to remain, wanted their God to remain, and they'd worship it, and Rome led it. But it had to be licensed. If you remember, we talked about that a little bit. It had to be licensed, okay? And Christianity wasn't licensed. They just said it was an extension of the Jewish faith. Until we see a change. If you remember when I told you, there was a change in Nero. He hated Christians. He hated them. And he burnt Rome and blamed the Christians. Okay. But that was local. We'll talk some about the two time periods, Nero or Domitian. And then the message foretell that God is in control and his children is victorious. All right. That's the message of Revelation. It's that simple. It's that simple. And we have made Revelation the bad book of the New Testament. We have had so many that tells about the book, about interpreting the book, about the view of the book, etc., the time frame of the book. It's that simple. Christians being persecuted by the Roman government, and the message is to comfort and meet the needs of those of John's time frame, plus not just John's time frame. It didn't just start and end in the first century, but it foretells and it lets the church know that God is in control, and that if you remain faithful, remember Revelation 2:10, be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give you a crown of life. Okay, there's a reason he puts that in there. The reason is they were asking, well, what's in it for me? Okay, if I remain faithful, what's in it for me? And again, I don't mean that in any bad connotation at all. But they were having problems. I mean, it's serious. We're talking about serious problems. Just think about what's happened over to ISIS and the Christians. If you say you're a Christian, what's been happening? That's a death sentence, isn't it? Think about it. We think how terrible it is to have their heads cut off. Well, I don't know. I think I'd rather have my head cut off than throw in the lions myself. Just put me over a stump. Cut my head off. Most of you probably say, well, that won't affect anything. But But anyway, the problems with it is some really say this downplays the symbolism too much. And the book claims to be a prophecy book, so some say it has further reaching prophecies. Okay, so they think it's more than the context of the time. All right, and the context of the time is John's time until the end of the Roman Empire. Okay, and so the last view really focuses on the fall of Rome. And it's written to encourage first century Christians who are being persecuted by what's RE? Roman Empire. And promises that God knows in advance of current and future trials. And that's what he talks about. And tell the church God is in control and will bring down their persecutors. Okay. So you've really, in all that we've given, you've really had a pretty good overview of what Revelation's about. It's not the big deal. It's a big deal, but it's not the big deal that's made out to be by all the denominations, all the prophets of our day or our last age, and etc. And so when we get through, I think when we study the book, I don't want everybody to think that everybody knows, and I certainly don't, knows everything that every symbolic sign or number means in there. Because we don't. Nobody. I've looked at a lot of different scholars on this, and they all don't agree. So I'm taking what it appears to be the most commonplace, and if nobody knows, I might give you my opinion and tell you that it's free. Again, eternity and it's free, but that's not the point of the study. The point of the study is what is Revelation all about. Okay, I hope that you keep these sheets, because if you ever study with somebody else, maybe a review of those can kind of help you get started in Revelation. Thank you for your time.
Are you?